Hey, Scott here, and welcome back to my very humble garage gym. So in this video I want to provide you with some tips to help you with the squat, which I've stated is the best exercise for training the legs and the posterior chain. And by the squat I'm referring to the low bar squat, where the bar is going to be set lower on our back and as opposed to the high bar squat. So whenever I refer to the squat, I'm referring to the low bar squat. Okay, so first thing, if you're going to squat, get yourself some lifting shoes. It gives you a much more stable surface from which to work with your squat. So I highly recommend, rather than just wearing regular sneakers that are going to be a little bit too spongy. So get yourself a nice pair of lifting shoes. You go on to scottallencole.com, check out the equipment that I recommend, and I've got these shoes there. These are Nordic lifting shoes that I purchased on Amazon. Okay, with that said, first thing is the foot position. So we want to start off basically with our heels about shoulder width apart, and then we want to turn the toes out at about 30 to 35 degrees, probably closer to 30, it just depends. That gives us more range of motion with our hips to allow ourselves to sink down into the squat. So you want to put your hands together into a prayer position, get down into the squat and get your elbows on the inside of your knees and shove the knees out. And that's the position that you want to feel like you need to be in for the bottom of the squat. And so you're going to feel probably a stretch in the groin there, and this will be harder to do when you're actually under the bar. So one of the cues that we try to provide you with when you're doing the squat is to shove your knees out on the way down and then on the way back up as well. So it's an issue that I personally struggle with. Some people also, not everybody does with the squat. It depends on your flexibility in the hips and the groin area, and whether some muscles in those areas are less developed than others. I'm very tight in the hips and in the groin, so I struggle with keeping my knees out as much as they need to be when I'm starting to get up in weight with this exercise. So from the side, basically it's going to look like this then. You want your back nice and flat, and notice that my torso is not very vertical. It's leaned over quite a bit, and this is because of the bar position on our back for the low bar squat. In order to keep the bar over the center of our foot, we've got to lean over a little bit as we go down. So as we go down into the squat, we want to feel like we're shoving our hips back so we can get into that proper position at the bottom. Now I've got my elbows pushing against my knees, my back is nice and flat. The last thing I want you to think about when you're at the bottom is your hip crease, where your thigh meets your torso. That hip crease needs to be slightly below the top of your knee at the bottom of the squat. So if you're too high, then you're not going to get the full range of motion and you're not going to get the full benefit of this exercise. Most people that are training to squat who have not been taught how to squat properly tend to shortchange themselves by not going far enough into the squat. And so you'll see them squatting 300 pounds, but they're short of the bottom position by several inches. If they try to go deeper into that squat, they're not going to get that 300 pounds. They're probably only going to they'll be lucky if they get 250. So I know this from experience, from when I started training before I actually got coaching. So you have to get low, get that hip crease right here. Needs to be below the top of the kneecap, below the patella. So you're going to feel like you're way down there. You're pretty deep in the squat. The next thing that you want to think about once you get down into this position is shoving the hips up. That's what drives you. you from the bottom of the squat. So hips drive up, and then you straighten up. So that's the general movement pattern for how to perform the squat. So the next thing I'm going to do is we're going to show you how to get under the bar to position yourself properly to do the squat. So I'm going to take a pause, shift the camera, and then we'll show you how we get under the bar. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at how to get under the bar. First, what I want to do is show you the difference between the high bar squat, which is probably the more common version, which most people, when they start squatting, that's what they tend to work on, versus the low bar, which I previously said is what we're just going to refer to as the squat. So generally speaking, when we're doing a high bar squat, we rest the bar right on top of our shoulders, or on top of a little bit lower on top of our traps. So we get under the bar, the thumbs are wrapped around the bar, and that's our position for holding the bar on our shoulders. Now, because the bar is in this higher position, to keep the bar over the center of my feet through the movement, I've got to keep my torso more upright, like this. Now with the low bar squat, the first difference that you'll notice is that the thumbs are not wrapped around the bar. We're going to keep the hands over top of the bar and use the hands to trap the bar on our back just below the spine of the scapula, which is this bone here at the top of our shoulder. So the bar is going to sit below that, but since it won't sit there naturally, we have to squeeze our shoulder blades together to get that bunch of muscle to form a shelf. And we set the bar in that bunch of muscle just below the spine of the scapula, and we trap the bar with our hands against that bunch of muscle. So it's not the most comfortable position in the world. And quite honestly, I struggle with it, especially when the weight gets heavier. I start developing elbow tendonitis because my elbows are not in a good position for me, because I've walked around like a gorilla my basic whole life with terrible posture. And I've got a left shoulder that's a bit tighter than my right. I've got a little bit of a shoulder issue that's been ongoing for a number of years now. So that's why I've transitioned to the safety bar squat, which I'll do another video on later on. Now, so if you're a bit older like I am, I highly recommend that you do some stretches before you start trying to get in position for this squat, this low bar squat. So I'll do stretches like this. Just to try and get things loosened up first. And then I'll practice getting in and out of the position a couple of times as well. And that gets the shoulders warmed up a little bit and loosened up a little bit, and makes it a bit easier to get into this low bar position. So to get into that position, you stick your head under the bar and through until the bar is in that position below the spine of the scapula. And then you set both feet in under the bar. So I highly recommend, if this is new for you and your shoulders are a little tight, that you put yourself in this position and hold it for a few seconds first, and then back out of it. And that's if you've done a little bit, also if you've done a little bit of stretching first. Now my garage in the wintertime gets very cold, so it's hard for me to get loosened up in the shoulders very quickly. I have a couple of heaters in here that will get the garage warmed up just a touch. If it's really cold out, the warmest I'm going to get it in here is 47, 48 degrees. with those couple of heaters that I use. So that's when I really struggle with this. So just do that once or twice. Today it's 82 degrees outside, so it's quite warm in here as I speak. So now we get the get back in position, and you want to feel like your elbows are down rather than up. So you want them down rather than flying back. Whenever I see video of myself doing the squat, my elbows tend to be up and I need to keep them down, but unfortunately, if you're tight in the rotator cuffs, it's going to be really hard. The other thing is that you want these wrists to be as flat as possible. But most people that I see doing this have one shoulder that's a little bit tighter than the other, and that causes the wrist on that side to bend a bit, and that's clearly the case with me with this left side. And then you try to get this grip as narrow as you can get it. So I have my forefinger on the smooth part between the two knurls here on this bar. That gives me a good starting point. Ideally, you'd want to get those hands a lot closer and then try and get those hands flat and trap that bar on the back. And then you start working on that squat. Now, in order to have a good position with your back going down and then back up, you want to focus on a spot in front of you about 6 feet on the floor. So you don't want your head up. You want your neck in line with your spine. So you definitely don't want to be up, and you don't want to push your chest up first as you're coming up out of the bottom position. Again, you want to drive the hips upward first and then follow with the rest of the torso. So so when you start in this position, on the way down, your torso bends over, and then your hips start from the bottom of the squat, and that makes you a little bit more horizontal with your torso right when you're pushing up from the bottom, and then your back will help straighten your torso out. So that's why this low bar squat is able to train that whole posterior chain from the hamstrings into the glutes and into the lower back. So it's an exercise that trains a lot more muscle mass than just about any other exercise, well, more so than any other exercise out there. The high bar squat focuses more on the quads because we're just going up and down and keeping our vertical posture, our torso more vertical throughout that motion. And so that's a more quad dominant, and that puts a little bit more pressure on the knees as well. So the other benefit of the low bar squat is because we're driving the hips back as we're going down, it takes pressure off of the knees. So just another reason why we want to train this low bar squat. Okay, so that's all I've got. Those are some tips for working on the squat. There's a video up on the website as well, scottallencole.com, on how to train a squat. So I highly recommend you check out that video. It's narrated by Mark Ripito over at Starting Strength. And I highly recommend you check out their website as well for learning how to do some of these lifts. Okay, thanks for watching. Again, check out scottallencole.com. You find this video interesting and informative. Hope you subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, and we'll see you down the road.